So first of all, like flow state, I'm sure most people have all heard about it when we talk about sports, or it's not just sports, it actually relates to many activities, and people have been researching it for hundreds of years. Many philosophers like Nietzsche and another German guy called Goethe who first described it. But there's one guy called Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi who first really did research into it and sort of identified the common factors and put it down on paper. So he's kind of known as the godfather of flow, really coined the term. And what he did was he was actually doing a psychology study of happiness and when people were most happy and feeling at their best and performing at their best. And he went around the world and he was talking to sports people, athletes, musicians, people from all walks of life, getting them to describe their experiences when they were in this state, performing at their absolute best. And he managed to find sort of common themes. Okay? And then he used the term flow because one of the main things that drew out of it was that everything just flowed when you were in this state. And you were drawing upon all your resources, all your skills, no matter how complex they were, and everything was just coming together. You're making the right decisions, taking the right actions. All this multitasking is just happening, almost automated, without you consciously thinking about it, and that allows you to perform at a much higher level than you would even think possible, because you can't manage that much activity and thought process. And so this was this thing, and it just flowed. That's what how people would describe it, and so he used the term flow. And the other common thing that people talk about is how time just dilates when you're in this state. Dilate can mean for a lot of people, most of it means that time just flies. When you're in this state and you're so focused on this activity, the next thing you look up and you've lost hours. That is a common theme, but it can also be time dilation in the other way, that things really slow down. It's almost like in slow motion when it's going on. So, but the common thing is time, your sense of time change. So this is like the common way of looking at flow. It's way of it's this state that you're in when that really is almost automated, and you have this feeling of total mastery of yourself and your activity. You lose your sense of self even. It's kind of you become the activity. Like you're so focused on it, like you just become one with the task, and you don't even have a sense of self anymore, if that makes any sense. It sounds mystical, but these are the common themes that people talk about. So this is something that does happen in freediving, but it's not. Is it a desired state? Like, is it something that we're all going to feel? I'd say probably not, because it requires the task to be really challenging. So it's a state that you would enter when you're like really pushing yourself at your limit, and that's actually a precondition for it. That's what triggers it. So what it shouldn't be confused with is just feeling good on a dive and other great things that happen when you're freediving, this meditative feeling or just zoning out underwater. All these are great things. That's not actually flow state. Being in flow is something that happens when you're actually at your limit. So does that make sense for everyone? Who here feels that they've got into flow in some activity, whether it's in another sport? I see there's lots of people who experience it. And though in those activities where you felt it, they're activities you've invested years in. Yeah? So this is a precondition. So it's something that requires a really high level of skill, because you're using skills that are really imprinted and programmed into your subconscious, and it takes a long time to get to that state. It's not something that happens that quickly, so you're not necessarily going to experience it until you've invested the time in it. Okay? And then you have to tap into that programmed skill. So that's what we're talking about with flow state. And the main trigger, as I said, that we can identify is this level of challenge. And we call it the skill challenge. Has to be sufficiently high. Okay. Luckily enough, we can all get into that state if we invest the time to get the skills and put ourselves in the right situation. Because actually it's something that we're hardwired as humans to switch into. It's actually, if you think about as human beings, we exist in an environment of scarcity where we're either having to compete, or the way we've developed as humans is we're programmed to be, I don't think how to explain this. We either have to compete for limited resources in terms of hunt for food, or we are the prey and we have to run away because someone else is hunting us for food. Okay, and so that means that often in the past we've suddenly had to switch into superhuman ability, and so we are actually hardwired to do this. Okay? So that's the good thing. We just have to now identify how we can better switch into it, and that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit more. Okay, so that's a bit about flow state. I'm now going to talk about the different aspects of the mind and how that fits into switching into flow state. Any questions so far on flow? No? Okay, so that all resonates with all of you. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is how the mind works. Okay, and the three elements which we have to consider when thinking about how to get in this mental state. The first thing we have to consider is the conscious mind. Okay. So, what does a conscious mind do? Conscious mind is how we think in the present. It's what we're focused on. Okay, so it manages our senses, like when we smell, when we see things, when we hear things, when we touch things. That's all being managed by the conscious mind. Okay? It's kind of our window on the world, how we experience the world. We can only generally focus on one thing at a time in our conscious mind. So it has its limits, but it's also how it links to the subconscious. Is when we learn skills, we have to learn them by focusing on them in the now and the present at first when it's new to us, and then by repeating it consciously many times, it eventually can switch over to our subconscious. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Not me. Our subconscious mind then is our reservoir of skills. Our subconscious mind can do 1,000 things at once. That's the powerhouse. Okay, that's where we learn to master something. Okay, so our conscious mind is our window on the world now and how we actively do things now. But when we do it repetitively, we can program it into our subconscious mind. Okay, so that's how they link together. And this is the main thing that we need to activate to get into flow state. Okay, because we have to be automated. We have to be multitasking and doing many complex activities, making many decisions, reacting to the environment. So the conscious mind is interpreting the environment as it's happening. When you're on a dive, when there's changes in conditions, when something happens, it registers it and then it applies what it's registering to the subconscious. You need that skill, you need that skill. But it's doing it automated without you having to consciously think about it. So that's how they kind of interact with each other. Then the third element we have to consider is our self-image. That's sort of weird one. That one probably surprised you. Like, where does that come into it? Our self-image is what we think of ourselves. It's who we are. It's our habits and our attitudes and what we believe to be true about ourselves. And this interacts with these two in a way of, it also manages our deployment of subconscious skills. But then our conscious mind is also really involved in creating our self-image. Because our conscious mind is what we think right now, and what we think about ourselves is what we become. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you have to believe that you are capable of doing things. If you don't really truly believe it, then you won't actually fully commit to taking those actions. How can I explain this? Making your bed in the morning. Okay, if that's to you, if that's something that you do, and in your mind, you're the type of person that is disciplined, gets up, makes their bed, tidies things up, and then leaves. Then you tell yourself that repeatedly, and even though you get up some mornings and you're tired, and you can't be bothered, and you need to get out the door quickly, you go, "Oh, that's not me. I'm the type of person that actually makes my bed and does these things." And so it forces you to take these actions because that's the type of person you are. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so it's the same as a free diver. It's like if you tell yourself that you're the type of person that commits to going training regularly, and then in a training session plans out their training session with a goal, and then commits to fulfilling that goal. So doing 10 FRC dives progressively, and you will finish it, do it, because that's the type of person you are. You're also the type of person that doesn't turn early. Okay, you think that's not me. It's like I always do my dives. I'm a successful diver. You've got to tell yourself that all the time, and then that's what you think is what you become. Okay, so that's your self-image. And then when you become that person, that feeds into your subconscious mind and actually makes it much more likely that you will act that way when you're doing the task. Okay, so they kind of fit in together in a way that, let's see if this works. Your conscious mind builds your self-image. It's what you think, and what you think is what you become. Okay? If you think something enough, that's what you will become next time. You can't become something if you're not thinking it all the time. Okay? So you've got to believe in your ability and move yourself towards that. Okay? So that's how that links in with your self-image. And then your conscious mind links in with your subconscious, because that's where you develop your skills. And that's where your performance comes from, all your skills acting together. Okay, so you program your subconscious using your conscious mind through training. And then, after that, your self-image is also links back to your subconscious by telling you how much weight you have to put to apply to your use of those skills. Okay, so it all has to balance. Kind of complicated. Kind of important.
It makes sense.
Yeah, it
Keep
makes
going.
sense.
Let's have a look. Let's have a look
Good.
at what happens when it's imbalanced. So you have these three areas, and to be effective and to get into flow state, they kind of have to be balanced. Okay, but the best way to look at it is what happens if they're not balanced. Okay? And then to grow your ability, you have to grow each of your areas. Okay, so if we look at the perfect scenario is a balance between the three: your conscious, your subconscious, and your self-image. But it's not always the state that we're in. And actually, when you're first beginning to learn any new sport or skill, what tends to happen is there's an overweighting, and you find that your conscious is the bigger circle. Okay? Because you're having to put all of your effort into learning new things. You're always thinking about them, and you haven't got you haven't yet programmed the skills into your subconscious, so you don't have that to draw upon. And also your self-image is already low because you know you're a beginner, and you're telling yourself, it's okay, I know I'm not that good at this yet because I've just started, and so that's not reinforcing your ability to do things either. So you have this total imbalance. Okay? So it's very hard when you're beginning to get into flow state, which makes sense. Okay? Over time, that will shrink because hopefully this will start getting bigger, your subconscious. But you might still get to a state where you've got good, like your conscious and your subconscious are quite balanced, but your self-image is still not developed. And that's because maybe you haven't set high enough goals, so you can't actually move yourself forward and achieve what you're capable of, even though you've got the skill sets. You may have been training for years and developed a good reservoir of skills, but your self-image doesn't match it. So you tell yourself, I'm not really ready for this year, I'm not ready to go deeper, I'm not ready for competition. That's how that would be a mismatch. Okay? So you've got to believe that you're capable as well to move yourself in that direction. What else could happen? There could be an imbalance in your subconscious, but that would mean you're not training properly, and you're not actually acquiring the skills in the correct way. Maybe you're training a lot, but you're changing things all the time, and you're not programming it in the right way, or you're learning things imperfectly, so your skill set doesn't actually match your other areas. So that's how you can see how it has to be balanced. And ideally you're growing them all at the same time so that you don't reach that imbalance. So how can we look at this in real terms about how we actually grow these, or develop a way to make it function correctly to help us get into this flow state, this way of being in practical terms? Let's look at them individually. What's a practical means of managing the conscious mind for a dive, for a performance? Okay, so what we're trying to do with the conscious mind is basically think in a positive way and not interfere with our programmed skills from triggering and operating in the background. Okay, so one of the things we know about being in flow state is we have to be super focused on the activity, but not on any particular skill, because then we might lose our ability to do other things, other skills. Okay, so I spoke about this the other day in deep planning, about how we can positively occupy the conscious mind using what we call a mental program. Was anyone there for that? Yeah? Okay. So that's a practical application, and that's what we're going to go through first. So when thinking about a mental program, think of yourself as a computer, okay? And you're basically trying to trigger everything to run as you've rehearsed it and as it's been programmed to do 100 times before. So that requires us to always run the same program and not change it all the time. Okay, and my mental program, I'll go through mine. You might develop your own, but it's easier if I just cover what I always do before a deep dive. And the first stage of your mental program that you run before a dive is what we call the point of initiation. So it's the point at which you start running your program. And you run your program for every single deep dive. And you never change it. Okay? So that way, over time, it becomes your thing, your trigger. And you'll see sports people in every sport running mental programs, even if they don't call it that. But the first time I remember seeing it was, there was a rugby player called Johnny Wilkinson, and it was yeah, he was our star when we won the Rugby World Cup way back. And he used to kick.
You really need
Kick
a video
penalties.
for this. You really need a video for this.
Yeah, I know. I know what it is. But he did this strange thing that he always used to do before he kicked the ball, where he'd put his hands like this in front, and like doing it, kind of like pointing it towards the posts. And it was an odd thing. Nobody else did anything like that. It was his point of initiation. It's what he did in the practice field 1,000 times before he ever did it on the pitch, and every single time before he kicks a ball he would do that. And you know, he would be nervous of a crowd. If you're in front of 50,000 people having to kick the 3 points, and it's the most important kick of the game, it's kind of like you're going to be a bit nervous. So he'd worked out a way where it just became like every other kick that he'd done. As soon as he put his hand in that position and pointed to the post, he just clicked into, oh, this is what I do. Like, I do this, and then I think this, and I do this, and then I kick the ball, and the ball goes through the post. Because that's what he'd done on the practice field 1,000 times. So why would it be any different? As long as he follows the thing, it just helps him shut everything out. He was running a mental program. That's just one example. You'll see sports people in every field doing it. You'll see tennis players twirling their rackets before they receive a ball from service. All these things are people using a mental trigger to click into a program where they can perform at their best. Okay. So it starts with a point of initiation, and in freediving, my point of initiation, it could be anywhere, but how far ahead of a dive do you actually want to start your program? You don't want it too far ahead, because otherwise you've got to run a really long program and it's like you have to really fill it up, and you'll see what I mean. There's only so many things you can think about and actually remain focused and thinking positively. So minutes, not 20 minutes. So for me, it's when I clip my carabiner onto the line. Okay, like clip, that's it, physical action done. That's when I start my program. Okay? That's all it is, point of initiation, doing something physical. Okay? You can have anything to do it, but it should be the same every time. So it should be something that you do on every dive. If you weren't wearing a lanyard, you wouldn't clip onto a line. But we always wear lanyards. Next is I call it point of attitude. So really now we're going into the actual program itself and what I choose to think about, and it's basically to think of positive things that I'm going to engage my conscious mind in, because it requires visualization and focusing on just one thing. Because one of the things about the mind is we can only focus on one thing at a time, as I said earlier. So if you actually have a process that you're thinking about, you don't have room for negative thoughts to come in. So you've got to busy yourself with something. That's kind of the main idea. So the point of attitude is to just use my mind, developing a positive attitude. So I start thinking about what it feels like. It's all about feeling, this one. What it feels like to have a successful dive. So I kind of imagine starting a dive, and rather than go into the technical parts of what I'm doing on the dive, I'm thinking about just how I feel when a dive feels good. Okay, you're swimming down and you're feeling positive and everything's kind of working right, and the temperature's good, and all the good feelings. And and you're going into a nice free fall, and it's a long free fall, and the speed of the water rushing past you, the exhilaration you're getting as you get this easy depth and just falling, the expectation that you're going to get to the bottom because your equalizing is on point, all of these good feelings. I'm just trying to actually feel the emotions and feelings to put myself in a positive mental state. And then getting to the bottom, that sense of achievement and exhilaration, kind of trying to relive it. And then the swim up to the surface and how it feels coming up, knowing that you've been to the bottom, you're already getting this sense of success, and you're anticipating getting your white card. All these things, and then actually making it to the surface, doing your surface protocol, and then getting your clap from everybody, judges giving you a white card, all of that. Positive feelings, that's what the point of attitude is. Okay? And it takes a minute or so to go through that whole process. So I've been chewing up time in a positive way, getting these good feelings, and there's no room during that process while I'm telling myself this story and having these feelings, there's no room for negative thoughts to come in my mind. Okay, that's the main thing.
Okay, so this is being occupied in a really positive way.
Okay, so once I've completed that, I move on to the next phase, which is, I don't try and keep repeating the same thing, let's move on to something else, otherwise my mind's going to know what I'm doing, that I'm actually tricking it into not thinking of anything negative or being worried. Okay. You can remember that on some of these dives are at your limit. Maybe it's somewhere I haven't been before. If it's a PB dive or it's a competition dive, there's a lot of pressure. It's so easy for a negative thought or a negative feeling to creep in. So you've really got to keep your mind focused and busy. Okay. So then, I've got this point of direction. After I've thought about the feelings, then I actually think about, all right, that was a successful dive. What do I actually have to do that dive? So I now visualize the dive. So this has 2 points. It's making sure that I'm aware of all the things that I have to do right to do the dive successfully. So it's kind of like a mental rehearsal. I'm taking myself through the dive just before I do it, which is a great thing to do. Again, and it makes me really think about all the things I've got to get right. And the way this relates into what I was talking about the other day, dive planning, is it fits your dive plan. Okay, so I know, all right, for this dive to be right, it's got to start with a really good final breath, and then I've got to pack full. So I'm going to start that at official top -30, but don't rush it. Like nice big packs at first, and then as I feel fuller, I slow down my packing. It's going to become smaller packs. Don't worry about the time, it's fine. There's plenty of time. I've got from minus doing my packing, plenty of time. And I'm thinking about reassuring myself how calmly it can be done without stressing. And then how I'm going to start my dive. Thinking, okay, I'm going to start it nice and smooth, plenty of time. Again, don't have to rush the duck dive. If you take an extra second or 2 seconds on the duck dive, it means nothing for your actual whole, compared to your whole dive. And then thinking about the first 20 meters of the dive, and how the first 20 meters is not something to be rushed. It's really all it's about is getting down to the point of free fall, having used the least amount of energy and effort as possible. It's not really a big part of your dive. It's kind of, but you've got to get it right. So thinking, okay, it's going to be the perfect first 20. It's going to be positively buoyant at first, so some strong kicks, and then it's going to feel nicer. Then I'm going to feel some glide and some negative buoyancy, counting my kicks, visualizing exactly what I want to get right. Okay? Remembering, for me anyway, and this is something that I've reminded people here before, sometimes I feel an urge to breathe on that first 20 meters. Don't let it stress me out. It's nothing. Okay? It's just a reaction to pressure. It's going to disappear. So reminding myself that that's going to happen. And then moving down to the next stage of the dive, which is when taking the mouthful and thinking about how I'm going to take it big a mouthful as possible when I hear my alarm, how many times I'm going to charge. So I can go through the whole dive, by the way. There's so much going on that has to get right, and each stage has to be right. So I'm thinking about all those different stages during this point of direction to make sure that it's in my mind, and it just reassures me through the rehearsal that I'm not going to forget to do something right during the dive. So this isn't a really important process of rehearsal, and again it's like my conscious mind is fully engaged and involved, and there's no time for negative thoughts to come into it. It's the key thing. Yeah? Once I've done that rehearsal, we're getting close to actually the dive time now. This is so as you get closer, this awareness that you're coming up to like your official top, that's actually when you're most vulnerable to getting negative. Like the pressure's building. Like, I'm about to dive 100 something meters and it's 30 seconds away or something like that. It's a point where you can lose your calm, lose your coolness. Okay, so I switch into a different state there, then I just call it a point of control, trying to control my feelings. I just focus on literally the first 3 actions. I'm just thinking of that everything up to that first 20 meters, and I'm just reminding myself that if I can get that right, final breath, duck dive, and get on the swim, everything else will then just click. So I've just got to get to the start line, if you know what I mean, and not worry about anything further. Like, you won't be nervous once you've started the dive. Once you've started the dive, you just go into automatic mode and you'll do what you're trained to do, and your subconscious will take over, and what happens, happens. Okay, that's as simple as that. If you turn, whatever. You don't have to worry about that. What you've got to worry about is just getting that right. And so that's what I just keep repeating. I don't have to do it for long, so it's not like endless repetitions for the first 20 meters. I'll probably go over it once or twice, and then I'll hear minus 30 seconds or something like that, and then I'll have to actually start doing something other than just thinking. So that's the final, almost the final part of the mental program. Actually, the final one is just the real point of focus, which is taking the final breath. So actually for me it's at minus 30, it's not official top. But then it's when I actually start doing the action. And so my final thought is literally just, okay, final breath, let's get this right. Take it slowly. So that forms my mental program, and that's how I manage my conscious mind in the lead up to the dive. Any questions on that? Silence. Does that make sense? This is something you have to train. By doing it for your 30-meter dive, or wherever it is you're at the moment, you need to start running this now. Decide on what you're going to do. Copy mine if you want to start with. Doesn't really matter, and then change it as you go along. But if you change it, stick to doing that. And then, if you do this now, then when you come to doing your target dives or your PBs, they will become easier because you've been rehearsing it and you've been programming it. So it's a skill, and it's something you have to tell yourself to do. It's involved your self-image. You tell yourself, I'm a disciplined freediver. I'm a deep freediver. I take it seriously. This is my sport. I run a mental program before every dive. This is how you need to be thinking. You need to think this regularly. This is what you write in your dive journal. After you've logged your dive, at the end of each dive session, in your journaling, you remind yourself in the first person who you are, what kind of freediver you are, what your goals are. remind yourself that you run a mental program before every dive. You keep writing it, and then it becomes part of you and what you do, and you become disciplined about it, and then your performances will move forwards with it. Okay? So that's a little bit about the conscious mind. The subconscious is all about training. Okay, so as we established previously, we need to program those skills into our subconscious mind. So how do we do that? Through our training. I think you've had some presentations on training. What do I want to say about training? Obviously, to gain mastery, you've got to train regularly. Okay? You need to be training 4 or 5 times a week. It's about the hours, really, isn't it? The hours you put into it. It's all about repetition, but repetition in the right way. Okay, so what can we say about training? Like, training goes in different. Sometimes you're training well. Other times things aren't going right. When you're training well and things are going right, train more often. You're on a run, and that's a good time. And that's when you should be doing it more, so that you repeat it more, and you're noticing what's going right, and you're repeating it. Okay, so also be conscious of, recognize when you're doing things right and repeat them. Okay? Don't focus on the things that are wrong too much. Be careful of your language and how you think about what's happening in the dive. Don't focus on negatives. Don't repeat to people afterwards, oh, this went wrong or that went wrong. Don't think of it in those terms. Just try and think of it in terms of, okay, I'm having problems with this, but I'm thinking this is how I'm going to solve it next time. But your language is important. How you think is what you imprint on your self-image and what you then become. Okay, so I don't know what more I want to say about training. It's not just about time, it's about doing things right. Okay, so be focused on that also. It's not practice makes perfect, it's practice of a perfect skill makes perfect. Okay, otherwise you're imprinting the wrong thing on the subconscious. Self-image. How can we better our self-image? I've already alluded to it, really. How we think is key. And so we have to be careful about what we think consciously and what we imprint on our self-image. It's good to have idols. I always have idolised Alexei in freediving. I think he's my role model. And I've always, when I've been at competitions, like to look at the way he behaves and look at his attitudes and the way he talks and the way he does things and try and emulate it. Okay, so he's one of the most robust freedivers that you will see in competition. Like, nothing phases him. He doesn't, I don't know if he runs a mental program. He obviously does. He has his own techniques of deconcentration. He does the same things before each dive. But conditions don't faze him. He doesn't seem to get any pre-dive stress. He tells himself that he is the type of diver that can turn up at a competition and with the minimum amount of preparation he'll do his dive, because that's the kind of guy he is. That's his self-talk. It's like, it doesn't matter if there's waves or it's cold. It's kind of like, he'll go into it with this attitude of, okay, it's a bit cold today and there's big waves. Wouldn't it be great if I could dive to 120 meters in this? And then he'll do it. So that's how he talks to himself, and that's how. So I'm always looking and thinking, that's the way I'm gonna. This sort of self-talk that I'm gonna develop. Okay, so notice who if you've got good freedivers around you, if you're notice what it is they do and the way they behave and emulate that, because that's how you're going to move yourself towards being like that, by thinking that way. Affirmations, good. again. So when you're keeping your dive journals, as I said before, if you repeat something enough, you move yourself towards that happening. Okay? Just like, so you should goal set, and you should write every day in your journal what it is that you're doing in the first person, as if you've done it. So if your goal is to dive to 40 meters, tell yourself, I'm a 40-meter diver. Okay, I'm a 40-meter diver, and this is how I do it. And put down the steps of how you're going to get towards it. And read that and write it each day again. And slowly program yourself into believing it. And then you'll move yourself in that direction. All these things help to build your self-image. And then when you begin to believe that that's the type of person you are, that's going to help to make sure that you engage your skills in the correct way when you actually dive. Is it too heavy? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Good. All right. Yeah. So, let's talk about the last thing here. This has really been kind of quite intense and focused on conscious mind, subconscious mind. We've kind of drawn a little bit away from the sort of wider thing of achieving flow state. Let's think about what other things can help us get into this. What else is out there that helps trigger this state of mind? I like to think of this as like catalysts for getting into this. And one of the catalysts that we can notice is that being in nature generally helps us to get into this state. And we've noticed it across other sports. There's so many sports where, like extreme sports, where over the last 20 years we've seen a real leap forwards in performances, like in climbing, in big wave surfing, in snowboarding, and a lot of them are extreme sports. A lot of them happen in nature. And it's like, what's happening there? Why is that helping? And this is obviously something in freediving as well when we're doing it in the ocean. Is there something going on that's actually helping us from being in the natural environment? So apart from noticing that that's where it's happening, I was thinking, what is it that is that helping with? And I figured, for me, I think it's because it engages the conscious mind in a positive way. It helps us to distract us consciously from the particulars of the task we're doing. Or even if it's really risky, we have this wider environmental sort of influence that's helping to take away our awareness of the specific risk of what we're doing. Okay, that's the way I interpret it. But it's definitely going on, and we can observe it in so many different activities. And in freediving, it's there to help us, because freediving is something that happens in the natural environment. So that's one good catalyst that we can tap into. The other one, though, is peer groups. Okay? And what we notice is massive leaps of performance seem to happen when groups of people are working together. Okay, so what's happening there? This is all really related to self-image, I think, in terms of when we're with a group of people, like what we believe about ourselves tends to, we match we rise to the level of the group that we're with. Okay. So there's actually a term within psychology they call the Bannister effect, which was first noted when there was an athlete called Roger Bannister. It was back in the 50s, and up until that point nobody had run a mile in under 4 minutes. And then Roger Bannister was a British athlete, and he was the first athlete to run a sub 4 minute mile. And before then it was unheard of. Like, it was thought beyond human capacity. It's just too fast. And then he did it, and 6 months later someone else did it. and then someone else did it. And so it's like nobody had done this ever before, and it was thought beyond the realms of human ability. And then one person does it, and then other people are doing it. So what's happening there is kind of like, because somebody has shown the impossible was possible, other people pushed themselves to do the impossible too and found it possible. Okay. And you see this happening in a smaller way in so many other different activities. Like if you visit a snow park in a big resort like Whistler or something and watch the kids riding in season, you'll see them, like one of them will crack. I saw this in New Zealand seasons ago. It was like one person would crack a 1080, and like nobody's been doing this before. And then as soon as one person had done it, like 2 or 3 would be, like within weeks 2 or 3 other people would be doing it. And yes, and if you look at any extreme sport, you have these things going on in skate parks, in groups of surfers. Self-image is so key, and by being in groups, in peer groups that bring us up, we can really expand our self-image and then move our performances forwards. My own personal experience of that was from the military. I was in the Marines. I was the Marine Commandos, and before I actually qualified, getting up to that level was something up there. It was kind of like you never really knew whether you'd be able to make the grade and pass the test. But around you, you could see people that had done it. So even though it was beyond your physical ability, like the tests that you'd have to do, you just didn't know how you were going to do it. It was always like things that you physically couldn't do. But the people around you had done it. They would say, "Don't worry, you can do it." Like you just have to never give up, never stop. And so you develop this mentality of, because you wanted to be part of that group, of like, okay, I'm not going to stop. If I drop dead trying, that is a better end result than not actually completing it. And by adopting that attitude, you actually manage to achieve it. Because physically you could do it, but mentally you just didn't think you could. And so it's all the same thing. Okay? It's peer groups and seeing that when you're in a group where people are already performing higher, you will raise your game naturally. So that's a really big catalyst. Diving in a group like this, you're always going to have people diving deeper, and that moves your understanding of what's humanly possible. Where else do I want to go with this? I think that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to have a question and answer session because it can get a bit heavy. There's some useful tools in there which I think you can draw upon, and you can ask me about that now, like the practical application of it. I've never really given it in that form before, so I'm kind of sorting my way through it. But I think it's all relevant. Yeah.
So you mentioned at the start how it takes years to develop not only mental flow state, but the skills to get to that. In your personal experience, how long did it take you, and what sort of levels your path?
I can't actually pick out the dive where I first think I felt. I think it was pretty deep there. So this is one of the things I was saying, is like it's not something that you necessarily experience that easily. I think the one good thing that freediving's got going for it is that one of the key triggers for flow state is you have to have that element of risk. Something has to really trigger your mind into believing it's got to pull out all the stops and use all its ability and skills to do it. So the task that you give yourself has to be of sufficient level of hardness to challenge you. That's the key thing. But within freediving, we have that challenge always there. It's kind of ever present because it being an environment where we can't breathe in, and where it's just naturally going underwater, deep underwater, we naturally think of it as a life-threatening kind of environment that requires a lot of different things, skills to allow us to go there. And so maybe we can tap into it a little bit easier in freediving. Already, I think right from the start, when we first learn freediving, we feel like we're achieving the impossible quite quickly. I see that teaching beginners. It's like at the beginning of a course, people really can't believe they're going to be able to dive to 20 meters on a breath hold, and then within 2 days, it's like you've opened up this whole world, and they're going somewhere they never thought possible. So I think freediving really allows people to tap into that sense of risk quite easily. So maybe it's easier to get into flow state in freediving because of that. But I think the first time I really felt that disassociation of time and just being totally absorbed in the dive was on some pretty deep dives myself.
I mean, you hear a lot. You hear athletes saying, "Yeah, I'm in the zone when I do this, I do that," but through their mind, there's stuff rushing all the time. There's so much input around them. Here, there's almost no input, so your mind is like
in freediving.
Yeah, like it's free to just mess with you for 3 minutes.
So managing the conscious mind in freediving during the activity is quite important. I touched on that so that's actually maybe a key difference from some other sports. There's still an element of managing the conscious mind during the activity to allow the subconscious things to go on, and how we manage that is important. How do we manage that? Well, actually, you have to think. Your dive plan is probably how you manage it. There's always something that you need to be focusing on that is like more of a focus than other things. So that on any particular part of a dive, there's something that you need to be getting right, and we kind of focus just on getting that right. But there's actually many other things that are going on in the background that you're still doing. And actually, when you were a beginner freediver, you were having to try and focus on all of them, and that's why it was all a mess, and you were getting stressed. And those are being programmed, and those are just happening now. Like staying straight on the line, head position, using your fins correctly. Like, you don't think about those things, you just do it. What you are thinking about maybe on the first part of swim is staying really relaxed. Thinking, no, I don't want to spend too much effort, having to push a little bit harder here because there's changes in buoyancy. So there's kind of awareness of more the bigger picture and how you should be feeling. You're not thinking of the different skills you're using. And then as you move into the next part of a dive, and you hear your alarm, you think, okay, I've really got to take my mouth feel properly, otherwise I'm not going to have enough air to get to the bottom. So you're focusing on that action, taking your mouth off. But again, at the same time, you're not thinking about your body position at the time or how close you are to the line. You're just doing that naturally. And so your subconscious is doing everything it has to do to get it right without you actively managing it. Because that's what your conscious mind is, you're just managing. You need to move a lot of things into the subconscious. So I think during freediving, we are using the conscious mind in a positive way on actual skills, but you're identifying the thing that you have to get right for that part of the dive. And that can be different for everyone. So it's what you identify as what you think you need to focus on to get right. Okay. And actually it's a really useful tool. I often relate to my students that just the thought of diving to 100+ meters is a scary thought. And if you actually thought about how far it is, and you look at how far 100 meters is down the road, and you think, I'm going to go that far underwater? It's like, you wouldn't do it. If you actually thought about, I'm going to hold my breath and go all the way, I can't even see, but you wouldn't do it. Especially then when you put it into, there's waves on the surface, it's cold down there, and all the other things that that would scare you. But when you break it down into just the process of what you have to do to go there, you never actually think about the distance or the depth again. You're only ever thinking about what you need to do on the different sections and getting that right. That's all you care about. Taking the mouthful correctly, getting a really full mouthful, taking your charges at the correct depth. Once it's really full and you've moved through your last charge depth, managing it in a really efficient way, not pushing too hard, moving your head in the right position, okay, managing the volume that's in your mouth as you go down, maybe doing a few kicks to pick up some speed as you feel yourself slowing down. And there's always something to be doing that you need to be focusing on. You don't have time to think about where you're going until the last bit of free fall, where you're managing just the volume and it's almost automated. You've done it so many times, you've practiced it. And then there's a little bit of scope for your mind to wander, and you've got to be careful there. And so then you can put a visualization into your mind. I visualize myself free falling, I take myself out of my body and just watch myself free falling. And I just give myself this mind, this picture to follow. And that's what keeps me steady. So yeah, the conscious mind is occupied in the free dive. It's not like it's definitely not an empty. You can't afford to leave it empty ever, because the mind will always fill. And if you don't put something in it, something negative will come into it. Good question.
How do you manage positive attitude when things don't go to plan? So you kind of
like what?
Like your mental conscious prep where you're really focusing on positive visualization.